Okay, we're going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
My pleasure. Trustee Kotinek.
Here.
Trustee Kukler.
Here.
Trustee Langen.
Here.
Trustee McCarty.
Here.
Trustee Arnett. Trustee Holder. President Livingston.
Present. With that, we do have a quorum. Mr. Clerk, if you could lead us in the pledge.
My pleasure. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 2 this evening, President's Report. I want to thank several LaGrange organizations, churches, including the Community Diversity Group, Leadership, and the NAACP for a very good and inspirational celebration honoring Dr. Martin Luther King this past Monday. A lot of activities. I want to thank members of our team that were represented at those through the community, those events. We also want to congratulate the Community Nurses Association, 95 years young yesterday. They're a important part of LaGrange and LaGrange's history and service, and so we congratulate them and know their best days are yet ahead. Finally, would like to simply thank the members of the Village Board and the team for their time at our biannual retreat that we held on January the 11th over at the hospital. We'll be reporting on that at our next meeting, regularly scheduled for February 8th. That was an analysis of our strengths, our weaknesses, our challenges, our opportunities, an affirmation of our pillars that we adhere to when we oversee our village government operations, and also looking ahead on opportunities as a community. So we will have more on that at our next regularly scheduled meeting. And with that, I have nothing further to report. Mr. Clerk, could you read the items on the omnibus agenda?
Certainly. Matters on the omnibus agenda will be considered by a single motion and vote because they have already been fully considered by the board at a previous meeting or have been determined to be of a routine nature. Any member of the Board of Trustees may request that an item be moved from the omnibus agenda to current business for separate consideration. Item A, ordinance. An ordinance authorizing and granting a franchise to Northern Illinois Gas Company, doing business as Nightcore Gas Company, its successors and assigns, to construct, operate, and maintain a natural gas distributing system in and through the village of LaGrange, Illinois. Item B, minutes of the Village of LaGrange Board of Trustees regular meeting Monday, December 14, 2015. Item C, minutes of the Village of LaGrange Board of Trustees regular meeting Monday, January 11, 2016. Item D, consolidated vouchers 151-228, 160-111, and 160-125.
And thank you, Mr. Clerk. Items under current business.
Under current business, this agenda item includes consideration of a matter being presented to the Board of Trustees for action. Item A, ordinance, variation, maximum building coverage, Anthony and Laura Pigato, 605 South Brainerd.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. With that, item number 3 on our agenda are public comments regarding items that are on our agenda this evening. Seeing none, consideration of omnibus agenda and vote. Item number 4.
I move for approval of the omnibus agenda as presented.
Thank you, Trustee Langen.
Second.
Trustee McCarty seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, roll call vote, Mr. Clerk.
Trustee Kotinek.
Aye.
Trustee Kukler.
Aye.
Trustee McCarty.
Aye.
Trustee Langen.
Aye.
And with that, the matter passes. Item number 5, current business. A, ordinance, variation, maximum building coverage, Anthony and Laura Pagato, 605 South Brainerd. Referred to Trustee Langen.
Thank you, President Livingston. Anthony and Laura Pagato, owners of the property at 605 South Brainerd Avenue, have applied for a variation for maximum building coverage requirements to construct an addition. The subject property is located on an interior lot in the R4 Single Family Residential District. This property in question is 50 feet wide, 134.84 feet deep, which is typical for lots in the R4 district. The maximum allowable building coverage in the R4 district is 30%. The property currently exceeds the allowable building coverage. The applicant seeks a variation of 19.6% from the maximum building coverage requirement of the Grange zoning code in order to construct the proposed addition. The code allows the increase of the maximum allowable building coverage by no more than 20%. This requested variation falls within the authorized limits of our zoning code. On December 1st, 2015, the Zoning Board of Appeals held a public hearing on this matter. At the hearing, the applicants presented their application to construct a 2-story addition, which included an eat-in kitchen area expansion. The motion was recommended for the variation was to be granted, was requested by the ZBA, and passed by a vote of 5-2. What we're going to do this evening is I'm going to start a discussion regarding this issue and then come out with the motion, because there are some key factors for consideration. In any variation request, this is a tough decision for the board and for the ZBA. The issues are we certainly want our residents to enjoy their homes and maximize, the living space that they have. But there are certain things that we're required to look at, and there are some catches that always get difficult. The 7 criteria, the first piece is unique physical condition. As I said, this is a typical home in the R4 district. Not self-created. According to the applicants, they bought the house 10 years ago and it was like this. Denied substantial right. I'm sure we're going to discuss whether having a reasonable sized kitchen is a right or not. Not merely a special privilege. The expansion is just to create a larger usable kitchen. The code and plan purposes. This is an issue I want to spend a little time on. As proposed, the expansion would meet the required side and rear yard setbacks, but would exceed building coverage requirements. I think that's important to note. One of the purposes of the building code coverage standard in the zoning code is to control bulk. The applicants believe that the proposed kitchen would be consistent with the context of the area and not affect the neighbor's properties in the appearance of bulk. The 6th criteria is essential character of the area. This will not have any adverse effect to that, and no other remedy. Typically, or so you folks know, we do have an administrative adjustment process. This exceeds the requirements for the administrative adjustment process, so it comes to the ZBA and the board for consideration. I have a difficulty with this item. The issues are this. Certainly we all want eat-in kitchens, but every Georgian, Cape Cod, and split level in LaGrange doesn't necessarily have an eat-in kitchen. That's one of the drawbacks of the homes. We have spent a great deal of time dealing with flooding, and it always comes back to then why did you grant all those variances? That's an issue, and it's something we as a board have to decide to take action on. It is a precedent that I don't know we want to open the door for, because all those Cape Cods, Georgians, and split levels have the same challenge. I've got a Cape Cod. We're trying to remodel our kitchen now, and certainly it's a challenge. The bulk is a concern. I have seen the property and looked at it, and that's a worry for me. And again, I don't think that this also matches the criteria for a variance. So that's my 2 cents. I would like to hear from my colleagues on this before making a motion.
I did attend the ZBA hearing, and one of the things that caught my attention, and maybe the architect can speak to it, is the fact that I think some concrete on a patio was going to be taken up, and so actually there may be less of a flooding risk than if it keeps the same.
Go ahead,
Sure.
please.
He is correct. We are not increasing the...
And just for the record, if you could just introduce yourself and
I'm
affiliation.
Randy King. I'm the architect with Architects by Design.
Thank you.
So the 1-story addition that is being added is actually going on the location where there's currently patio. So we are not increasing anything that would cause any flooding issues with this because we are not increasing the coverage of the ground.
And I guess the other question or comment that Trustee Langen had to do with bulk, and how's that addressed?
From a bulk standpoint, yes, we are exceeding the allowable building coverage, but we are not exceeding the other sections of the code that respond to mass. In other words, if this was not a split level, if there was not just 3 rooms on the first floor, we would need this. But because of the nature of the house and the way it was built, there's a garage taking up over 1/3 of the first floor. There are 3 rooms total. That's it. So the reason we're doing this is because although it may seem like there's bulk, we're really talking about a split level where there's basement only underneath part of the house, which has been raised up. So your back first floor is actually raised up. There's basement underneath that. There's no basement underneath the front. So from a bulk standpoint, yes, we're over on building coverage, but from a building mass, we don't exceed any setbacks. We're not increasing the water drainage problem. We're really just putting something in where there's currently a patio.
And I guess, for me, the precedent issue kind of goes the other way. It seems that we have in the past allowed these type of developments, things, eat-in kitchens, have been supported in the past. Do you have any feedback on that? Or?
Personal knowledge of doing that on other projects here in town, yes. I mean, it may not always go towards the kitchen, but the space that gets added assists all the rest of the rooms on the house, which gives the chance to enlarge the kitchen. So although we are adding specifically the space to the kitchen in this case, in other cases we've added to the first floor footprint and just reorganized spaces, and the kitchens have gotten bigger even though the space that was added didn't actually go into the kitchen.
I do have a procedural question, and that has to do with missing 2 trustees. How does the vote, and how many votes do they need in favor? And is there any reason to suspend or not call it for a vote? I guess there are issues.
This is an ordinance that's required, and to approve the variation if it's going to be approved, and that requires 4 votes. of the
4.
board.
And if the party wanted to, is there a way to withdraw that and bring it back when there's a full board?
Yes, the answer is yes. It's at the will of the Board of Trustees whether to allow it to be continued to a different board meeting if there's a concern about absent trustees.
Other questions? Mr. McCray.
Randy, a couple of quick questions regarding, you've mentioned you do a lot of work in LaGrange, and we certainly know, and you do some of the nicest houses in LaGrange, and we appreciate that. This is a fairly typical layout for a house in LaGrange, and especially in the countryside area, right? The base house, the house that started,
That started,
that
yes.
split level.
Yes. Some of them have basements underneath the whole thing. Some of them have basements only underneath half.
Mm-hmm. And the challenge is, as I think at one point even in here, the response to one of the questions is, this is probably too much house for the lot, but there are a lot of houses like this in LaGrange. I don't know if that's the most defensible position, but I think it is. It is a fairly common problem with this size of house or this type of house in LaGrange. I noticed one of the things you're adding in the kitchen is a new powder room. Were there studies so that you don't do the powder room but add an eat-in kitchen?
Yeah, the current powder room door opens right into the kitchen, which is actually against the code.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to shield that, and it's also very, very small. So we were actually turning the current powder room into a very small pantry because it's just about the size of a closet.
Mm-hmm.
So
What's the total square footage of the house? Sort of the realtor's version, not including the basement.
I'm gonna say it's probably around, I don't have an exact number, but I'm gonna say it's somewhere around 1,600 square feet. You take off the garage, it's, it's just, there's the main level and then a level up 5 feet for half of it. So half's on the main level, half's up 5 feet.
Okay. All right, I don't have any other questions. Oh, you know, I do have one more question regarding not self-made. And this is one we talk about every time, so I'm not gonna let you miss the chance too. Self-made does not mean he didn't do it. Self-made means something else created the problem. Because the previous owner built over the maximum, that is self-created. That's the way what the law is written. That's the interpretation.
And obviously, it was approved at the time. So I think we were dealing with different codes at the time, too.
I guess that
or
would be
lack
a
of
question. I guess a question for Pat. This thing is over the limit. If it is just a trade-out, then there should be an existing ordinance for the variation. And this isn't necessary what we're doing.
I'm going to defer to Assistant Community Development Director Angela Massars. Do you know if there was a variance granted previously on this? So there you go. What she stated is it probably predates our current code.
Okay. Just by the fact that we're spending $14 million to control flooding, and the biggest cause of flooding in LaGrange, I think, is overbuilt houses. I'm gonna have a real hard time supporting this.
Other comments or questions?
I guess I just,
Trustee Kukler.
I have a follow-up as the two architects were talking and it went way over my head. If there was a variance before, and I realized that this house was constructed before the code, so there didn't need to be a variance, what would have happened that we wouldn't need to have this issue because it wouldn't be adding? I didn't get that.
If there was a different code, this house wouldn't have been built this way because, or I mean, if the code existed, nobody would ever build a house like this because it doesn't make any sense from a practicality standpoint on lot usage. You can't, the split level house was something that builders created because it kind of gave people a family room feel in their basement because they had windows that were out of the ground as opposed to into the ground. So it was a big trend for builders to do it during a certain period of time, but the reality is all they did was took their basement storage and put a couple windows in it. So today, we would never build, you haven't seen these split levels built for a long time because of this problem. So this is an outdated house, and yes, there are a number of these houses in town, but nobody would ever tear this house down and build another split level.
So could that be the justification as far as self-created, that although it was built, the code was changed afterwards and therefore impacted and it wasn't self-created?
If I was able to reuse the footprint, if we were to tear this house down, we wouldn't be coming in for this variation because I would be able to manage the footprint of the floor plan in a way that it was more useful. And I would have a basement underneath the entire house, so they had places to put storages. Instead, they're using the basement that the builder made for them to live in as storage.
I do also have concerns with the flooding, but it's my understanding that this will not increase flooding.
This does not impact water at all.
And so for that reason, I would be in support of it. The other reason I would be in support of it is because it did pass the ZBA. The majority of the ZBA members, after hearing the evidence, felt comfortable granting it. And for that reason, I would support it. However, I may be the last person talking, so I think the issue is, what do you guys want to do?
It's our option, right? Can they?
I think we'd like to continue this so we could get the whole board.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions or comments on the matter? We have not made a motion at this point.
Yeah, I guess I'd also like, if it does come back, to know the history on the overbuilt. Was there a variance granted before, or was it built prior to the zoning ordinance, or was it just a non-permitted use before? Was it just done, obviously by the previous owner, so that's not something that they're going to try to arrest you for, but I think it's an important point of fact in the procedures.
Okay, good questions. I guess the options are, and I'll check with the counselor here, we don't have a motion on the floor. So we move on to our next point in the agenda, or we make a motion and vote on continuing it, if that is the pleasure of the board, seeking more information, or we make a motion and act on it either way. So are those options?
Yes, they are. I would say that it would be most common if the board did do something rather than just pass this, either to make a motion on it and vote, or to have a motion to set it to a future agenda, to reschedule it to a future agenda so that it's memorialized. That would be the most common process.
Okay, I think we got feedback from the applicant, and there were good questions from the board, so I would be seeking a motion. What's the pleasure of the board at this time?
It would be my pleasure to do a motion to continue it, although I know it was brought up by Trustee Langen, so I don't, if he doesn't have an objection, then I will make that motion.
Second.
Motion to continue this matter.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? This would be to, I presume, February the 8th, regularly scheduled board meeting. That will be our attempt. That's the next time we publicly meet. Any other questions on the motion? Voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Item number 6 this evening, manager's report. Item A, village regulation of small cell sites. Mr. Polifshin.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've got a couple of workshop type of items for under the manager's report this evening. The first one is village regulations of small cell sites. It's a pretty legally based analysis on that, and so we're going to turn it over to our village attorney to walk us through the proposed regulations. Mark.
Thank you, Bob. And we will move through this quickly so that there's plenty of opportunity for you all to ask questions. I just want to touch on 3 different topics before your discussion. The first is a general description of the systems. The second is the key decisions that have gone into the fashioning of the documents that are in front of you. And then the third category is village-owned facilities. So you all by now are at least familiar with the concept of small cells. There are various different technologies right now that are being employed by the major wireless carriers to enhance both coverage but especially capacity of their systems in manners other than building more of the giant, what are called macro cells, which are expensive and difficult to site. That brings these facilities down to a much smaller scale. There are 2 major types of deployments of carrier signals. One is a DAS system, which is really more like the water meter system that we have, or a system of antennas in a single building or an office complex where signals are collected and then sent to a base station. Most of the wireless carriers, all the major wireless carriers, are not using that technology. Instead, they're using technology of what are called the small cells, which are in effect the same as a macro cell, a fully autonomous individual cell for signal collection. And that's what we're talking about in Grange. There's a massive initiative by the major carriers. There are tens of thousands of small cells that are planned in the next couple of years. A single carrier may, just in this calendar year, install 10 or 15,000 of them itself across the country. So they're here. The small cells are regulated in the same manner as the rest of the wireless carriers' infrastructure by the Federal Communications Commission, and the same legal standards or regulatory standards apply. You saw the 3 major standards in the memo that the staff prepared and gave to you relating to not in effect denying access to subscribers for a wireless carrier, and the other major one is that you don't discriminate among wireless carriers and, in essence, refuse access because your criteria or standards for one carrier are different from another. So the village has had several inquiries, a couple serious ones, pending ones, and then some other more informational inquiries about installation of small cells. There are a couple of approaches that the village can take. One is to let them come and be where they are, but that isn't the typical Grange way of handling matters like this. And the other is then to enact reasonable parameters or regulations to be sure that the village has adequate legal authority to help manage where these go and how many of them there will be. And so we have put together a draft of that kind of legal regulatory context for the board's consideration. The largest factor in making those decisions, which took a long time and a lot of discussion to make, is location control. And so we went about it in various ways. Understanding coverage and capacity issues was one important element of location control. But then the other side of it is protection of the village's assets and residents, and establishing some sort of criteria to do that. We eventually chose to set out a hierarchy or a priority of locations that the village would see as being the appropriate manner of protecting residential neighborhoods, protecting against overmassing of these small cells in small areas, because all the carriers are going to want to have greater data capacity where there are a concentration of population, such as morning and afternoon commutes at the train stations. And so we have created that hierarchy for you. It pushes these facilities outside of outside of the residential areas, or in locations in residential areas that are already populated with utilities on poles, keeps them away from front yards and corner side yards, and prefers arterial streets over collector streets, and prefers collector streets over residential streets where they are forbidden or proposed to be prohibited. The second major criteria with locations is what would maximize the village's ability to manage small cells at a relatively low administrative cost to the staff in terms of resources, and came up with a decision that some municipalities that we represent also are making and others are not, and that is to prefer village poles, village facilities to mount them on. There are a couple of very good reasons that have gone into making that. The first of which is that if the village can control them rather than wireless carriers moving to the railroads or ComEd, then you would just have that extra bit of tighter control. So the proposal is that that's the highest priority on the list. Followed closely behind, though, are other utility poles that meet the same locational criteria as where village poles would go. The second major factor that led to preferring village facilities is that the carriers pay rent for these, and the rent exceeds the administrative costs and maintenance costs of having these. And so in combination, and then defrays costs for reviewing the applications, and whether that's just at the administrative level or under engineering consultation or legal consultation as well. And adding those two major criteria to each other indicated to the village staff that preferring village poles would be best. And then you can see the rest of the priority there. The second major factor in key decision making was what criteria would be applied, and you see that we have gone we are putting carriers through an application process that's pretty thorough in terms of the information that they have to provide to the village relating to their existing infrastructure, their coverage data, their data capacity, their expectations as to where in the village ultimately they might want to install small cells so that we have a sense of where they will be, what other wireless carriers are going to do, and how many they'll need. And then the third on the key decisions in terms of a regulatory context it relates to the decision-making process. And we thought for a long time about how that should be. The FCC regulates in addition to regulates the criteria that are available for the village to apply, regulates the process as well, as briefly described in the memo. So we determined that the initial decision would be at the departmental level. And although we've named one particular department that's in charge of receiving and processing the application, it'll be just like a building construction or a zoning matter. Many of the departments will be engaged in that process of decision making. And then if the decision is granted, it stays at that level. If it's denied, then we put in an appeal process, as much for the village's protection against a claim of any sort of discrimination among carriers, but also for the benefit of a wireless carrier to have a second opportunity to present its application for a particular site. And that would be at the village manager level. And then the village manager's decision would be final. And then the third category to talk about is the village-owned facilities. Because the proposal is to prefer village facilities for mounting or installation of these cells, it became even more important that the village's interest would be carefully guarded when a facility like this is installed. The lease that you see in your materials is one of our making. We drafted it. It is fundamentally based on some of the major concepts in the leases that the wireless carriers use as a model for themselves. It is, however, a lot more diligent about appropriate risk allocation between the carrier and the village and its facility. If a wireless carrier, just for example, puts a small cell on a pole, that no longer means that 100% of the risk and of a casualty and the payment and replacement of that pole and facility should rest with the village, just because it did before the small cell was there. By taking out a long-term lease, that the wireless carrier, in essence, has come into a type of a few bundle of sticks ownership of that pole, and therefore should share the risk of casualty. That doesn't exist in the wireless carrier leases, as you might suppose, and there'll be a substantial amount of negotiation of this lease. Another thing is that the wireless carriers look for long-term residency. These small cells are not nearly the cost of the macro cells, but they are not cheap either, and so they look for a longer-term lease. 20 or 25 years is not unusual. So that puts the village in the position under their lease of just being stuck with a particular rental cost or rental exaction with some sort of annual or whatever rise based on CPI or something like that. We determined that wasn't adequate because the market can change more or less from year to year or in chunks of years. So we've added something I've never seen before in a wireless carrier lease, which is having a long term but in 5-year chunks. And at the end of every 5 years, there would be a complete reevaluation of again, the wireless carriers haven't seen this, and we don't know how that'll go. But and it's really this is just an example of the thought that the thinking that the staff went through, and I with them went through in determining how to put together a lease. And so in summary, I would say that this is in front of you for discussion and consideration. Some of you may not want small cells, and others of you may not care to regulate them, but we're guessing that it's somewhere in between. And I think that there is now a sense of timeliness to all of this because LaGrange isn't the hotbed of, great, huge income from huge users of data, but it is exactly where wireless carriers want to be and start, so that as these get installed, they become like macro cells, just another part of the landscape. And so they'll be knocking more and more at our door as the weeks pass.
Thank you, Mark. So, board, this is something that we wanted to put on the agenda tonight to discuss and then take action, presumably at our next board meeting on February the 8th. But it wasn't something we wanted to show up for the first time before the board and then act on the same night because of the complicated nature of telecoms and cell towers and licenses. We wanted you to, if you didn't have a question tonight, digest that, communicate with Bob or Mark or myself. And at this point, I would open it up for discussion, questions, and the like. Any questions? Yes, Mark. Trustee
How
Langen.
did we structure the maintenance of equipment? I know you got at least a piece in here, Mark, but so that they can't abandon the equipment and just stop using that pole.
Yes, at any time that a carrier ceases to operate the facility, whether it's at the end of a lease or just in the middle of a lease term, they are required under the lease to remove the installation. However, that's in the lease for village facilities. I believe that it probably is not adequately presented in the regulations, so if it's on a ComEd pole and it's abandoned, that it should be removed. I presume that ComEd and the railroads have those lease protections, and there is a modest protection in the wireless carrier's model lease, so we'll double check that.
Yeah, just some experience I've had is while it's in there, they don't monitor it and take care of that as efficiently as we'd like to see it.
Yes.
My second thing is a comment. The $250 a month is way too low. Way too low.
Yeah, that's becoming our understanding, and we continue to research the market.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Langen. Other questions? Trustee Kukler.
Yes, first, Attorney Birkeland, I think it was a great job and very informative and looks to protect the village's interests. So thank you for your work. I know that from our last meeting, all the trustees are concerned and would love utilities to be put underground and things of that nature. Is this impacting our long-term goal of that someday happening?
For wireless carriers, Mark. No, it is not helping at all. There is.
Not that it's helping, is it hurting?
Yes. The answer is it's neither. These small cells are aesthetically more palatable, perhaps, than another tower. There is backhaul and fiber optic cable is to connect a small cell to the entire wireless carrier's network infrastructure, and that backhaul does go underground. We have fiber optic cable being buried by at least one company in the village now, and wiring up the villages, among other things. So the answer is that this technology will not be the end. It is already, in development, but these facilities will stay above ground.
Let me ask more directly. If for somehow we convince ComEd to bury their lines and therefore the poles are no longer necessary, would the fact that we've entered into this lease keep us from being able to remove the pole? I assume these are going on existing poles and different things that we use. Are we going to build a specific pole? Maybe that's where I'm not clear on.
Okay, that's good. I can clarify that a bit. The village has a series of its own existing poles, and that would be the first preference for where a small cell would be sited if it's anywhere near a place where a carrier wants to be.
What are village-owned poles? Which one?
I can defer that to Ryan Gillingham.
So one of the options that carriers are considering are both the concrete light poles as well as the decorative poles. Decorative light
I
poles,
might be able to
excuse me.
elaborate on that. So, for example, carriers in the third and fourth quarter of this year, as they started to approach us about this, had a particular statement that there was a lot of demand around the train stations. People wanted to have access to their Wi-Fi and their technology. So imagine that area and the facilities that are owned by the village. And Ryan, what would be examples by Stone Avenue and LaGrange Road Station that are municipally owned?
Right, so we have both concrete poles that exist on Burlington, so they're about 30 feet in height, as well as we have the decorative poles that are on Hillgrove Avenue. Both of those, the carriers have considered as alternatives for installation.
So those poles that he's talking about, streetlight standards is another way to look at them. The village has many of those. The village also has locations that could be attractive to wireless carriers, where if the village did not have a pole in place, it would turn to the carrier and say, you install a pole that we will own. For example, it could be around an institutional building like Public Works garage or a school. So that's another alternative. The Cobra lamp poles are relatively common for small cell. The decorative poles are not, but the technology for trying to conceal them in a decorative or make them less obtrusive is advancing. Is that responsive?
It's responsive, and I guess taking it one step further, though, if they end up going on to utilities poles.
Like ComEd.
Like ComEd, where
Yes.
ComEd now is making money on rent on those poles, they'll be even less inclined to ever remove the pole.
I suppose that's right. I think the reality with ComEd is it has no intention of burying lines except when necessary to accommodate development, because they want someone else to pay for it because of the enormous expense of burying lines. So I can't satisfactorily answer your question in full, but I would say that if it came to a point where a ComEd line needed to be relocated as a result of a conflict with a new development or a redevelopment or some other matter, that ComEd would move the small cell off of it. I do not yet have a copy of ComEd's standard lease to verify that.
All right, and to me, one of the areas that we've talked about as a board are the ComEd, and I assume telephone, the poles that are on Hillgrove where we have parking. And we've talked about it at length in other meetings. You know, wouldn't it be great if we could ever remove those poles that would increase parking and things like that? And so that's an area, if it's possible, that we should be dissuading these wireless carriers from operating and encouraging it on village area, you know, directing them to the village areas. I will say that when I was reading this and said, you know, the studies, and I know some of the people that presented to the board from the various wireless carriers talking about the train stations, I have to believe LT North is a huge data generator just from having high school kids and paying for data plans. But that has to be a driver. So I would think that, you know, either Stone Avenue is close enough or they'll be asking to be moved over there in some location. I think it's a great legal document. I think that it's wonderful that LaGrange is being proactive in this area. I do want to get top dollar on those leases, whatever that might be, and I'm confident that the staff is looking out for our interests.
Thank you, Trustee Kukler. Other questions or comments on this? I have a question for folks that are listening in or may inquire about this. What are you seeing as the average size of one of these small cell sites? Is it, you know, this size or?
No, it's bigger than that, water pitcher. It's really two major components, and Ryan can speak about this
Please.
too.
Yeah.
The antennas are small, and they're unobtrusive, the actual antenna. But then there's a cabinet or a power box that in which the switching and power equipment is located. That box can be anywhere from 2 to 3 feet by square, and it's typically mounted on a typical utility pole, such as ComEd. It'll be mounted not less than 8 feet or so above grade, and can be mounted much further up the pole, depending on interference with any existing electrical or telephone lines that might be also on that pole. On a street light, all of that is small and can go very near the top of a Cobra-style street light, and they are probably less intrusive, aesthetically intrusive, than the ones on utility poles. Is there something to add to that?
Sure. I think that I can talk about the application that we have received in terms of its technical components, and that the first application we received would be for a village-owned pole, and what we've asked, or one of the requirements that we asked, was that the pole be a decorative pole consistent with other decorative poles within the village, and so this would be a pole owned by the village. The height of the pole that's being requested is 35 feet tall, and that's slightly taller than our existing street lights, but just to give you a scale of in terms of height, and then your other dimensions are correct.
And at what location, Ryan?
The first location would be at the intersection of Hillgrove and Brainerd at the southwest corner, and this would be constructing a pole. This would be a village-owned pole in that grassy area at that corner.
I think
couple of follow-ups.
trustee,
Sorry.
go ahead.
A couple of follow-ups on that. Would there be a light, or would this be a pole just dedicated to a small cell?
The initial plans are this would be a pole just dedicated to small cells. However, though, our long-term thinking is that we would have multiple users or multiple small cell sites on the same pole.
And I guess that was my next question is, we're talking about the size of the box, but we could have numerous boxes on each pole.
Right. One of the thoughts is in terms of consolidating the different carriers on one pole is that you would eliminate the number of poles that would be used within a particular area, as we would assume that they would all be looking for the same area in terms of data needs.
I guess to me, I don't know if it's a pro or con, or if it's feasible or not feasible, on making it a light or something so that it has a dual purpose and perhaps isn't just, oh, that's one of those small cell tower poles, and whether that makes sense, I guess, to get your feedback and thoughts on that.
Mark?
I agree with Ryan. There are various factors that it'll take a long time to talk about here, but co-location is an issue because the wireless carriers are often looking at being at the same height. All of them are, but the notion that Ryan told you about the consideration of co-locating in an area like a train station would not necessarily carry over to a pole closer to a residential area, like on a collector street. So we play the game of aesthetics, and instead of having 5 poles, you have 2 that have co-location in an area like a Burlington and Hillgrove. But then when you move away from that area where the demand is a little less and the aesthetics are significantly more important, then you take a different approach to it.
What about the thought process of having the pole also act as a street light as opposed to not being a street light and just being a pole?
Yeah, I have not taken that under consideration. Something we could talk about.
I understand where Mark's going with this, and I'm sorry. The idea of what's that pole there for? Refresh my memory, which ones are our decorative poles? Are those the concrete ones?
Generally, when we're, just as nomenclature, when we're talking about decorative poles, we're talking about the black poles with the decorative
The
lights on
faux
top.
cast iron.
Correct.
It's sort of a vintage, they're roughly a turn-of-the-century vintage. As opposed to our non-decorative are either the highway aluminum or wooden poles.
Correct.
Is it, well, one, I find it highly offensive that we try to put that stuff on a turn-of-the-century pole, but I'm sure I can get outvoted on that pretty quickly. Is it possible to mount the antenna on the pole but require the equipment to be mounted on the ground? Because the objection to me is not the antenna. The objection is that massive box of equipment that's hanging 8 feet above barely above my height when I jump.
Asking to prove that.
I would offer a couple of thoughts. There are two issues that come to mind, and the first is relative to height. They all want, most of the carriers want to be as high as possible, and so that dictates in terms of what poles they can go on and where the antennas are mounted, because at some elevation, it's not going to make sense for them to put it at a particular location. The second piece of that is I think we're still learning in the technology of the small cell sites and what's possible. This is a relatively new technology, so the idea of ground mounting the equipment seems like a plausible idea, but I think that's something that we'd have to research and get back on.
That would allay a great deal of my fears.
There are ground mounts, and I think a lot of people may feel the way you do, but I think also there'll be a lot of people that would view them in the same way they view AT&T's cabinets, as being more intrusive on the ground, probably more fraught for vandalism and repair than being, and if 8 feet is too low, you push them higher on the pole. But there would be I think there would be a mixed reaction to having them on the ground.
I agree, but I think we could, like we've set up a hierarchy of locations, I think, and it's particularly the location that you're talking about, the first one where we have grass, we have a protected area, the site, it's prime for mounting that on the ground. Likewise, most of the first ones are going to be near train stations, near the school, where I think locating the equipment on the ground would be a far preferable. And then secondly, I think it would be nice to find a pole that's not our decorative pole. I just don't think you don't put a decorative pole in the middle of a piece of grass. Where Mark was going at, why that's going to look stupid, a pole sitting there with nothing on it. And he said, well, let's put a light on it at least. But maybe the idea should be there's a different pole that we use that's even less obtrusive, because if we're only mounting an antenna on it, we can keep it slimmed down, or we can keep it less obtrusive or something like that. That would be my feeling, that it's never good to try to put new technology into an old box. It usually messes somebody up. So that would be my thought. The second thing, and again, generally the wording for the lease I think is great. Some communities have required that these things be camouflaged or masked. Did we look into that at all?
Yes, the concealment industry is growing for small cells. I have a partner who just came back from a telecommunications industry conference, and there are companies now that are devoting themselves to concealment. There are many challenges, because concealment means that, for a small cell, means that it's going to be something. It's going to be like a mutant lamp, big and around, that the cell can fit into, along with a bulb, which is now technology now exists. And we presume that we don't want the palm trees, the fake trees that
Cactus,
they sit in,
the cactus we've seen
or
some of
cacti. So we have not seen. I have not seen. I don't know if staff has researched, but I have, because I don't have anything else to do but look at pictures online of small cells installations. I have not seen anything yet that comes close to being adequate or that it's preferable to just putting the thing up by itself yet. But there is an industry for concealment.
And also, I think it'd be helpful if I think we need some language relative to what's visible. No visible labels. We don't want a big sign that says Viacom or somebody stickered on the box. I think we should have some language about compactness. If they're grouped, they need to be grouped as tightly together as possible. They need to be uniform finishes. And I think we ideally decide what finish that is. It's black, it's gray, number 1357, Pantone, or something like that, so they don't have to ask us those questions. They're just in there.
Thank you, Trustee McCarty. I might suggest that there's some good note-taking here, some good feedback, that if we are unable to put this to paper and get all this worked out by the 8th, that's okay. We've gone this long without small cell sites, so let's do it the right way with the right result. So if it will kind of inform the board as we go along. If it looks like we need more time, we'll perhaps look at the next February regularly scheduled meeting, that second Monday, or fourth Monday rather. And then if possible, sometimes the mind's eye wanders in terms of what these look like. So if there's any pictures or samples we can get to the board, that's always helpful too, I think. Really appreciate the work that went into this, Mark Birkeland and others. Any other questions for this segment of the agenda? And we do appreciate it. That's very helpful feedback. Don't hesitate to offer that in between meetings as well. Mr. Plipshin, anything else as it relates to item A on the manager's report?
No, Mr. President.
All right, thank you very much. At this time, we're going to advance to the final stated item on our agenda, but before I do so, I would like to acknowledge John Pappas from our zoning board, who's here this evening, and Beth Augustine, who's on our Community Economic Development Council, as well as former trustee Nancy Kenny, who is here this evening. Thank you for your ongoing service. This next segment of our meeting is critically important to the formation of our budget, and we are midway through that process. We have conducted our hearings as it relates to the next budget levy. We have, as earlier stated, done our strategic planning. This really is a matter of capital and how that relates to our budget and what we are able to do as a village. And some of these decisions are long-lasting and need to be done right. So with that, Mr. Plipshin, I thank you in advance and your team for the detailed work in assembling what we have here, and I would turn it over to you to begin our capital workshop. We'll walk through the items in capital here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to take this opportunity to make two comments on the big picture as it relates to the proposed 5-year financial plan for capital improvements. First, we're now getting into really expensive infrastructure costs, and it's a function of scope and needs, and I'll explain that in a second. Under our previous street program, we generally replaced the top layer of asphalt to stabilize the condition of the street. That approach has allowed us to extend resources and resurface streets on a neighborhood-wide basis, but roadways can only be resurfaced so many times. Our second generation of street resurfacing is now focused on making repairs to fail subsurface conditions. This level of treatment is more expensive and results in fewer streets being resurfaced at a time as compared to our first generation program. We've been resurfacing our streets on a pay-as-you-go basis using a combination of MFT funds and the general fund transfer. As the operation and capacity of our sewer system has become a priority over the last 8 years or so, we've used that same pool of combined resources to not only conduct major street projects, but also advance MARS. And a good example of that is the reconstruction of Bluff Avenue. And the idea behind doing those at the same time is to properly coordinate the underground work with the street work so as to use taxpayer dollars efficiently. So to summarize, between the significant scope of our change in our street program, the reduced capital transfer to the from the general fund to the capital projects fund, and the combined use of the transfer and MFT funds towards MARS, our pay-as-you-go approach for streets and future segments of MARS will be that much more challenging. Not to be ignored, we've also funded improvements to our water system on a pay-as-you-go basis up until 2012, at which time we issued bonds to pay for the cost of the replacement of our meters. And in addition to that, we've used a portion of those bond proceeds and a significant amount of our water fund reserves to fund the current reconstruction of our water pumping station. So the takeaway for water main improvements is that while we'll still be funding these projects on a pay-as-you-go basis, we may need to look at alternate rehabilitation technology, such as water main lining, for maintaining our water infrastructure as an alternative to pipe replacement in order to keep up with physical depreciation, stretching our fiscal resources, and to hasten accountability. Second and finally, we need to remind ourselves that our capital program is operating under the cost containment plan. Since 2020, we reduced the, since 2010, we reduced the annual general fund transfer from $1 million to $700,000. That action has also played a role in our ability to pay for capital improvements over the past 5 years, and will for the next 5 years as currently budgeted, or is proposed in tonight's capital improvement program. As we look at priorities coming out of cost containment, we should not forget that restoring this transfer should also be considered. So before I transition over to Ryan, I want to note that you've received a considerable amount of material to read in your packet. We'll assume that that's been previewed. Ryan is going to briefly comment on projects that are currently been completed, and he'll spend longer narrative on strategic priorities and on projects that are either in progress or imminent. We'll follow the order of the staff reports as organized in your agenda packets, beginning with a status update on the current fiscal year by fund, followed by staff recommendations for the next 5 years. And we'll take questions as we go along.
May I ask the board, and Ryan, stay tuned, in case there's somebody here that might have an item for public comments that are not on the agenda. We really are going to take some time talking about capital, so this may be a while. So if you've got a quick statement, is it okay if I jump ahead, board, and go to number 7 for a moment?
Absolutely.
Are there any public comments regarding matters not on our agenda this evening? Okay, sir, please. I think it might be. Just, there you go.
Good evening, trustee, and good evening, President Livingston. My name is Matthew Simmons. I'm the owner of AMJ Towing. We've been a vendor of the village of Grange for 4 years, doing their police towing, their municipal towing, and all the villages need when it comes to cars or assisting the police department. Around December 28th, 2015, we were informed that we were no longer a vendor of the LaGrange Police Department anymore. And as the owner of a towing company, you take that to heart, because having a police department and providing for the police is an honorable service. And I feel with all the things that we've done for the village, as far as we've donated cars back to the village for the police department to use for surveillance and undercover work. We tow all municipal vehicles for no charge under the vehicle weight rating of 26,000 pounds. In an event where a police officer can't assist a citizen in unlocking a car, we've come out and we do that for no charge. We change tires for no charge. And I can go on and on and on, but I know you guys got more things. As the owner of AMJ Towing, I'm coming in front of the board to ask for the board's help to get us reinstated back on the police department. When we were accepted 4 years ago under Chief Hollab, we received a letter that we were accepted. And every year as the owner, I call up and I ask the chief or the deputy chief, whoever it may be, hey, how we doing? and I've never heard that we have a bad report. And when I got this news, right around the holidays, I was devastated. I did contact Chief Renee Strasser, and it just seemed like I was just, you're just a towing company, and everybody, realizes that, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but the average human being says, oh, tow truck, bad instance, bad person, and that wasn't me. And to find out from a colleague, that you were no longer a vendor of a police department. I mean, we got no letter, I got no call from her, and I don't know what I did. I don't know what my company did. I have an employee that I moved into the town of LaGrange to minimize our response time. 85% of the police officers that we deal with that I know of says that there's nobody faster than us responding to an accident or arrest, which keeps the police officers, safety down so we can clear the intersection and help them out. So I'm asking the village to review this and see if they can investigate anything and see what we did. And if there wasn't anything, Chief Strasser said that there was just too many companies. She had 3 companies, and she only needs 2 companies. And I honestly, as a human being, don't believe that, because for 4 years we've been doing a great job for the village, and we would do anything. I mean, I've donated my trucks to the village. Whatever the village needed, we were always there. And I just feel, crushed and, disheartening, and I'd like to still service the police department. Maybe the deputy chief knows why or something like that, but I've just come here to express my concern to you guys, allow you guys to know what I've done, and see if we can get back reinstated.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you for letting us know about this. We've obviously got a lot of operational things going on, so this is informative, and I can tell you that we will be responsive in getting back. We have not discussed this as a board. You're giving us new information, and we'll get with our team here and find out what's going on, and appreciate you letting us know.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Any other items not on our agenda this evening? With that, thank you, board. Why don't we go ahead then, Bob, and continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I finished my opening remarks. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. Ryan, thanks.
Well, thank you for the opportunity tonight to talk about the capital projects. We're going to follow the same format as we have in the prior years. First, we'll talk about the capital projects fund, then the water fund, and then lastly, the sewer fund. So we have about 60 plus projects and topics to go through, so I'm going to be brief in going through them, but if you have any comments or questions as we're going through, please don't hesitate to stop and ask. So with that, the first project is the Willow Springs Road safety improvements. This past year we completed the construction of a traffic signal and other pedestrian safety improvements on Willow Springs Road at its intersection with the LTHS South Campus. The total cost for these improvements was approximately $411,000, of which the village received approximately $400,000 in outside funding. The next project is the Stone Avenue train station renovation. The project was substantially complete in the fall of 2014, an approximate cost of $1.15 million. The engineering for the next phase is currently underway, with construction expected to begin in the spring of 2017. The scope of work for this next phase includes removing the kiss and ride on Hillgrove Avenue and replacing it with diagonal parking, as well as adding bicycle parkings on both sides of the track. Grant funds have been received for this project in the approximate amount of $1.4 million. Next project is south of 47th Street drainage improvements. A number of initiatives have been undertaken in response to the severe flooding events that occurred in 2014. First, an engineering study was completed that assessed the benefits and cost of various flood mitigation alternatives to address specifically overland flooding. From this study and discussion with the board, several projects were recommended. These include the 50th Street storm sewer, the Brainerd Avenue flood wall, as well as sewer lining projects. In April 2015, a voter referendum for the funding of these projects was approved. Since this time, staff has been working on to complete the engineering plans for these projects. First is the 50th Street Storm Sewer Project. We're in the process of finalizing these plans as well as the permits for this project. The total cost for the 50th Street Storm Sewer is estimated to be $13.83 million. We're hoping that construction is expected to begin late spring, early summer. Staff is also in the process of discussing options for reconstructing the portion of the existing sewer that crosses the quarry. And lastly, staff is continuing to coordinate with MWRD on regional solutions and possible funding opportunities for the project. For the Brainerd Avenue flood wall, staff is in the process of completing the plans and specifications and meeting with the LaGrange Country Club to answer questions and discuss any concerns. The estimated cost for this project is $1 million. We expect that permitting will take an additional 6 months, and therefore project construction could begin in the fall of 2016. The next project is the fire department apparatus floor. In 2012, a structural analysis was completed in response to potential structural deficiencies within the floor. The structural test determined that the beams have sufficient capacity to support the loadings. However, repairs to the floor slab were identified in the amount of $400,000. This past year, 5 sections of the deteriorated concrete floor slab were identified for repair. During the removal process, significant deterioration of the concrete was observed in one of the patches. We went ahead and repaired this deterioration at the approximate cost of $41,000. Since these repairs address the issues within the floor slab in the front bay, additional repairs are not required at this time. The concrete floor in the rear bay still requires repair. Staff plans to provide temporary supports within this area until funding can be identified for the permanent repairs. Long term, staff anticipates that additional areas will continue to require patching as water and chlorides from salt continue to cause damage to the reinforcing steel within the concrete slabs. Next is the Ogden Avenue Relief Sewer Project. The drainage study for this project was completed in 2010. The study recommended that a relief sewer be constructed in the approximate amount of $6 million. Staff applied for a green infrastructure grant through MWRD to construct the first segment of ores, as well as reconstruct Lot 14 as a green infrastructure project. Staff is also working with IDOT to explore opportunities for combining the IDOT storm sewer improvements on Ogden with the first segment of ores. Due to the significant cost of constructing the first segment of ores, MWRD restrictions, and limited village resources, there is not a budget allocation for this project at this time. The next project is the Northeast Planning Area. A number of improvements are being planned for the northeast corner of LaGrange Road and Ogden Avenue. These improvements include, first, IDOT safety improvements, which includes the addition of a right turn lane and turning radius modifications at all the corners, signalization of the Ogden and Locust Avenue intersection, and then lastly, pedestrian lighting and other improvements associated with the Opus Uptown development. In order to complete all the proposed work within the single corridor as part of one project, the village secured grants, land, and other concessions from IDOT, the Park District of LaGrange, Opus, and the Central Council of Mayors. In addition to the Opus and IDOT contributions, staff was able to secure a $1.2 million grant for this project. Staff is in the process of developing an agreement with IDOT to coordinate all of these improvements as one project with an anticipated letting in the fall of 2016. This line item represents the village's matching portion of the grant. We expect that these funds will be reimbursed to the village through a combination of Opus and IDOT contributions. Next project is the LaGrange Road corridor improvements. Specifically, we're talking about the 52nd Street crossing. KLOA completed the preliminary engineering design for the improvements to this crosswalk that includes rectangular rapid flashing yellow beacons on the existing pedestrian crossing sign, the installation of a pedestrian refuge island, and additional signage. In working with the DCO and state representatives, $120,000 in funding was reallocated in the state's capital bill to this project. IDOT has not provided approval for this project yet. Staff is planning to meet again with IDOT officials to advocate for these improvements. Next is the Cossett Avenue resurfacing project. The village applied for and received a grant for resurfacing Cossett Avenue from Brainerd to Gilbert. Construction of the project was completed this past year in the amount of $596,000, of which the village received approximately $418,000 in grants. The rehabilitation of the water main under Cossett was also completed 1 year in advance of this project. Next is the 50/50 sidewalk program. As part of the cost containment plan for the 50/50 sidewalk program, the budget was reduced from $50,000 to $15,000. This budget reduction has been continued into the current budget. This past year, approximately 2,364 square feet of sidewalk were replaced. The sidewalk program continues to be a very popular program among residents. We have approximately 141 residents on the waiting list. This represents approximately, or probably over $70,000 worth of work. We continue to offer residents the option of participating in the program at 100% of the cost. Also, approximately 142 trip hazards removed in the CBD this past year, and at a cost of approximately $16,000. Next is...
Well, Ryan, can
Yeah.
I share, there's something important on there too. I think the fact that you're working on economies and scale, working with the Village of LaGrange, Western Springs, Riverside, and LaGrange Park, and North Riverside, and a joint purchasing agreement for that sidewalk program is good business. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next is the tree planting program. The village strives to replant a replacement tree for each tree that's removed due to disease or damage. The village has on average planted 191 trees per year, which includes those lost from the emerald ash borer, which we'll talk about in a second. The number of trees removed and replaced under this program continues to go down as those trees that are susceptible to Dutch elm disease and the emerald ash borer go down as well. And the next item, which is the emerald ash borer. The emerald ash borer, since its initial discovery in 2009, spread rapidly through the village. Prior to 2009, the village had approximately 1,540 ash trees in the parkway. Since that time, the village has removed 1,326 ash trees, and to date, we've replanted almost 1,000 of those trees, and we continue to replant where available space is available in the parkway. Due to limited space, treatment of ash trees, and the lower than expected quantity, the total cost for removal and replacement of ash trees is expected to be $765,000, or $235,000 less than the original $1 million estimate. Next is the sewer televising program. The village owns and operates 360,000 feet of sewer. The routine cleaning and televising of these sewers is important. For next year, we propose to continue with this program for routine cleaning and televising in the approximate amount of $60,000. The next project is the Bluff Avenue Reconstruction Project. The project was substantially completed in the fall of 2011. The final payment was made to IDOT in 2015. Over the next year, staff will work with IDOT to close out the MFT portions of this project. The total project cost was $6.7 million, of which the village received approximately $4.1 million in grants. Next is the Maple Avenue Relief Sewer Project. The construction of the next stage of MARS from roughly Bluff Avenue to 6th Avenue was completed in 2013 in the approximate amount of $2.6 million. The next stages of MARS are planned in fiscal year 2019 in the amount of $1.9 million, which would be construction from roughly 6th Avenue to Madison, and again in fiscal year 2022-23 in the amount of $1.6 million. Next project is the 47th Street corridor improvements, and similar to the 52nd Street crossing work, state funding originally designated for a pedestrian bridge over Ogden Avenue was reallocated to several pedestrian safety improvement projects, including improvements at 47th and 9th and 47th and Wyola in the amount of $240,000. KLOA completed the preliminary engineering for the project and recommended that hawk signals be installed, which alert motorists to a pedestrian crossing as well as provide for a stop condition. IDOT has indicated that they're not supportive of a pedestrian hybrid beacon at these locations. Staff is planning to meet again with IDOT officials to advocate for these improvements. Next is the 47th Street and East Avenue traffic signal feasibility study. IDOT is currently in the process of completing a Phase 1 engineering study for this project, which included hosting several public meetings on the subject. IDOT is recommending signalization of the intersection and converting the two-way spur ramp to one-way southbound. Staff is continuing to work with IDOT on solutions that will maintain the existing two-way spur ramp. The next project is the Ogden Avenue corridor improvements. The village petitioned IDOT for the creation of a 20-mile-an-hour school speed zone between Park and Spring Avenue. IDOT denied this request. Plans and specifications were then developed for the installation of flashing yellow beacons above the school crossing signs, and we're waiting for IDOT's response. Funding for this project was again secured through a DCO grant in the amount of $40,000. Construction is anticipated to be completed in 2016. Next is the Kensington Avenue resurfacing from Cossett to Burlington. This past year, this section of roadway was resurfaced. The total cost for the project was $438,000, of which the village will receive approximately $318,000 in grant funds. The project was completed in conjunction with the Kensington Avenue work just south from 47th Street to Cossett, so that we have one continuous roadway segment along Kensington Avenue. Which leads into the next project, which is the Neighborhood Street Resurfacing Project. The Neighborhood Street Condition Survey was completed in 2011 and forms the basis for street repairs. An update to this study is planned for fiscal year 16-17. Under this program, as I just mentioned, Kensington Avenue from 47th Street to Cossett was completed. The total cost for this project was approximately $1.26 million. As we develop the next street condition survey, we will have to incorporate the higher cost of repairing roadways as experienced on Kensington Avenue into the updated street condition survey report. Next is miscellaneous engineering. This account covers expenses for consulting engineering services for projects that are not anticipated, not associated with a capital project, or require special expertise. One item of note is the long-term strategic planning and facility needs analysis for the Public Works building. This was delayed due to other priorities, but we hope to complete it this next year. Next is the crack filling program. Staff recommends continuing with the crack filling program in the annual amount of $20,000. Similarly, we recommend continuing with the thermoplastic street marking program in the amount of $15,000 annually to restripe pavement markings that are damaged or worn out. The next is the sewer lining program. As previously stated, the village owns and maintains approximately 360,000 feet of sewer. We have proposed a sewer rehabilitation program to repair those sewers which are showing signs of age, are cracked, or are failing. And specifically from the emergency sewer televising report in 2014, approximately $775,000 in sewer lining was identified. The routine sewer lining was also planned to resume in fiscal year 16-17 in the amount of $150,000. So when combined together, the total budget for sewer lining this coming year is $925,000. Next is the parking structure, the surface coating reapplication. The protective coating on the top deck had worn out, and so we replaced that coating this past year in the amount of $116,000. Next project, continuing on the parking structure, is the bumper wall replacement. An unknown vehicle hit one of the bumper walls within the parking deck this past year, causing damage to the wall. The wall was fixed in the amount of $48,000, which was reimbursed through the village's insurance carrier. Next is parking lot 12 resurfacing. This parking lot was resurfaced this past year as part of the street resurfacing program in the amount of $72,000. We combined this with the street resurfacing program in order to gain economies of scale. And then lastly is the transfer for debt service. The proposed 5-year budget reflects the end of debt service payments for the streetlight bonds in fiscal year 2017-18. For financial planning purposes, the additional funds have been appropriated to provide funding for future capital projects in subsequent fiscal years. So that completes the capital projects current status report, and so now we'll move into the staff recommendations. As already mentioned on the neighborhood street projects, we propose to update the street condition survey this coming fiscal year in the amount of $30,000. The next resurfacing program is not budgeted until fiscal year 2021-22 in the amount of $1.6 million. Next is the Edgewood reconstruction project from 47th to 51st Street. Under the village's first residential street resurfacing program, Edgewood Avenue was excluded due to cost considerations, with the thought that LaGrange Memorial Hospital would financially participate in the project. Since this project requires reconstruction of the roadway, in addition to sewer and water improvements, it has been separated from the neighborhood street resurfacing program. This past year, the village applied for federal aid designation for this route, but was unfortunately denied in its application. Staff recommends that Edgewood Avenue be included in the upcoming street condition survey so that the roadway can be considered with other village priorities. Next is the police and fire department roof. The existing roof was installed approximately 25 years ago and has experienced a number of leaks. An assessment of the roof was completed a couple years ago, including a detailed moisture scan, which showed significant water infiltration throughout the roof. Staff recommends replacement of the roof. The estimated cost to replace the roof is $375,000 and has been incorporated into the current budget. Also at the police and fire department is the HVAC project. Similar to the roof, the existing mechanical equipment is 25 plus years old and is in need of replacement. A mechanical engineer evaluated these systems and recommended that the boilers and several HVAC systems be upgraded. The boilers were replaced this past fall in 2014. The next phase of the project involves replacement of the chillers and HVAC control systems, an approximate cost of $275,000. Staff recommends that these repairs be completed in advance of the remodeling work that's being planned as part of the consolidated dispatch, and has therefore included this project in the upcoming budget. Next are the bus shelters on LaGrange Road. The bus shelters are worn out and showing significant signs of rust. Staff has included $30,000 within the budget for their replacement. We expect to receive a grant from PACE for the replacement of these bus shelters in the amount of $15,000. Next is the LaGrange Road train station. Staff proposes to create an additional 14 diagonal spaces through the elimination of the existing taxi stand on Hillgrove Avenue. The approximate cost of this project is $70,000 and is included in the capital projects budget for fiscal year 18-19. And then lastly is parking lot 6. This is the parking lot that's behind the police and fire facility. This lot is in need of replacement, and staff recommends replacing this lot next year in the amount of $125,000. And then there's also the future outlook section where we talk about projects that have been identified but not yet budgeted. So that concludes the capital projects staff recommendations, and I'll move on to the water fund status report. Fiscal year 2015-16, full-time salaries are under budget due to temporary vacancies. Currently, overtime expenditures within this account are approximately $25,000, which is below the budgeted amount of $48,000 or $49,000. This is largely due to the mild winter that we have, so if that continues, then we will be under budget for this line item. Next are professional services and specifically the Geographical Information System, or GIS. Staff continues to make progress on the implementation of the GIS system. We've been focusing on getting the utility information into our GIS system. However, we've also worked on developing both internal and external websites to provide property and other spatial information to village residents and to staff. Next is the leak survey. The purpose of the leak survey is to find previously undetected leaks in the village's system in order to improve accountability and reduce expenses. I'd like to draw your attention to the graph on page 2, showing water accountability for the last 24-month period. As you can see from the graph, water accountability is cyclical, with the lowest accountability occurring during the winter months periods. We believe this is the result of water main breaks and/or lower usage during these periods. However, we continue to investigate reasons for these lower accountabilities or for this trend and make repairs when we identify them. This spring we'll be completing another village-wide leak survey to locate any undiscovered leaks. We recommend continuing with this program to improve accountability and reduce expenses within the water fund. Next is the water pump station improvements. Last year the board approved replacement of the existing 30-year-old pump station. The scope of work for this project includes replacement of pumps, control systems, piping, and other controls. Construction started in June of 2015. Hopefully within this next month, we'll actually be starting to test the pumps and motors and turning the station on. We expect the project to be 100% complete this spring. The total cost for the project is estimated to be $1.7 million, and funds for these improvements are both from the 2012 bond fund as well as water fund reserves. Next is the Villa Venice water main replacement project. The village owns and operates a 6-inch water main on the east side of Villa Venice from roughly 51st Street to Plainfield Road. This main is a relatively newer main. It was constructed in 1963. However, though, we have experienced 20 water main breaks on this line in the last 20 years. This is significant. Staff recommends rehabilitating this water main through water main lining this next year in the approximate amount of $290,000. So now we will move to the water fund staff recommendations, and the first is the water rate. Water sales are estimated to be under budget $425,000 or 8.5% in fiscal year 15-16 due to above normal rainfall during the spring early summer months, resulting in below average water consumption. Between no announced rate increases from the City of Chicago and McCook and managed operating expenses, staff does not recommend, and therefore the proposed budget does not include any water rate increases in each of the village's 5-year financial plan. We will continue to evaluate future village water rate increases 1 year at a time, pending actual rate increases from McCook and Chicago. Next are water mains. For water main replacement projects, staff attempts to coordinate the water main replacement with street resurfacing when possible. After the pump station is complete and the Villa Venice water main improvements, we propose no projects in fiscal year 2017 in order to build water fund reserves back up.
Quick question regarding the water main replacement and our leak problem. Do we have an understanding of how much we're paying for the lost water? What is it?
We do, and I'm going to look to Luke because I think he gave me that number the other day.
I think it's that number, right?
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, we took a look at what kind of water loss we're incurring, and we're estimating it's between about $100,000 and $125,000 in water loss annually.
Okay. It's a substantial chunk that,
It's about 2% of the operating budget for the fund.
okay, thanks.
Just on that number, is that the cost to the village or from McCook, or is that at the village's rate, which is about twice the cost from McCook, right?
Correct. That would be the price of the water that we would be paying to McCook. That's our cost in water purchased.
Okay. I guess could we just talk briefly about what are the plans in the next year or two to find out or try to find out what's causing that water loss?
So there are a number of things that we're doing to try to address water accountability. They range from doing the water leak surveys to verifying that all meters are accurately accounting for water, and basically that all facilities that are using water, you know, have a meter, and all lines that are going to buildings have meters. There are other things that we do as well, which are to check our interconnects with other villages to make sure that those are closed, to make sure that we're not losing water through those. However, though, the more that we look at the data, and you know, the more information that we get through having the technology to be able to assess it, it would appear that a significant amount of the water is through leaky joints and other exfiltration from the pipe, you know, into the soil or adjacent, you know, surrounding. So it very well could be a bunch of minor leaks contributing to the issue versus, say, one big leak. Occasionally, we do have those spikes where we do find the one major leak. Other initiatives that we've taken that we continue to do are also to, during night when there's low usage, to pop manhole covers to look to see if we can see abnormal water usage in any particular pipe, which would be indicative of a leak. So it's all of these things together that we're doing to try to, you know, identify where this water's going, both in the operation of the system, as well as in the accounting of how we're accounting for the water, as well as, you know, meeting with other industry representatives to try to think of other things that we haven't thought of. We spend a lot of time trying to think about this issue and try to, you know, fix the, you know, or try to improve the water loss within our system.
I know that the auditors say that our water accountability is low, and I'm not sure what they compare that to. How do we do in comparison to our neighbors that have similar aged facilities and things like that?
Anecdotally, talking with other public works directors, you know, for inner-ring suburbs similar to ours, I would say that, you know, our experience is similar. It's very difficult to try to make a apples-to-apples comparison with other communities because not everybody operates their system the same way, nor do they have, and in fact, some municipalities don't even have meters. So it can become a challenge to try to compare, you know, one to another. However, though, what we do share is, you know, approach towards, you know, fixing water mains and you know, trying to improve the accountability. So things such as water main lining or replacing the water main to try to make improvements in the system is, you know, another initiative that we do.
And a whole nother matter, but you mentioned water main lining. I do have some concerns with the new technology, in quotation marks, for water main lining, you know, and whether or not you have Flint, Michigan, and their problems with their water mains, probably because they weren't lined maybe, but I have concerns that they will someday come out, well, we used this new technology, and that new technology proved to be toxic. So I don't want to be the first village using the new technology. I'd like to make sure that it's tested for quite some time, since these water mains last 100 years. My comment only.
Ryan, do you have any feedback? That's sort of a
Yeah, I do.
okay. Good point, Trustee.
You know,
Cooper.
and to address your concern, we're not the first. We're not the first to implement this technology. And it's also a method that has been tested and approved through the IEPA and their testing as well. It's not something that's used in all applications. It's not something that we would say, you know, for all water main projects we're going to do this, because there are certain situations where it makes it easier to implement and others that, you know, where it's more difficult. For example, water mains that have a large number of services are very difficult because you have to send a little robot in to find those 5/8 inch connections. And so in some cases it's easier to just replace as we would. But I think it's having that in the toolbox of choices, and you know, and projects like Cossett Avenue was a good project to do it because we had very few services off there. So, but anyway, to address your concern. So, continuing on the water mains, the only other thing that I wanted to mention was, there are several other identified but not yet budgeted projects, which are, the replacement of the water main on 47th Street, as well as, the replacement of the water main on Edgewood, which I, briefly mentioned earlier. Moving on to the sewer fund in the status report. First is included in the budget under the sewer line is $3 million associated with the bond issue for the Brainerd Avenue flood wall and the 50th Street storm sewer. And then the other project to identify is the sewer lining program, which is combined with the capital projects program that I previously mentioned. Again, we recommend repairing a number of sewers within our system that were identified during the emergency sewer televising during 2014. And then for the sewer rate, the sewer service fees are also under budget by approximately $65,000 due to above normal rainfall during the spring and summer. And sewer fees were increased this past year to $1.50 per 100 cubic feet to support the identified sewer improvements. That completes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. At this point, would open it up for comment, questions.
One question, one comment. Question, do
Ryan.
we have commitment from the hospital on the Edgewood project?
No, we do not.
Two, comment really, 385,000, 400,000, 1,000,002, 418,000, 13,000, 4.1, 15,000, 431,000. Those are just some of the grant amounts that Ryan talked about as he did this. I'd like to get that number and let people know what it is, because I think people want to know, A, that you're doing a great job and the village is doing a great job finding those funds, and this is a very difficult economic environment, so it's hard to find those. I appreciate that you're doing that. And two, I think the taxpayers just like to know that both their federal and local money is working for them. So I think those would be good things to pass along to the residents. Great job, though.
Thank you,
I love
Trustee
hearing
Langen.
those numbers.
Trustee McCarty.
Piggybacking on those same comments relative to the grant funding, the secrets of getting grant funding, one of them is the long-range planning that the village does, that the staff does, and that we do, because oftentimes those grant funds are made available on those who are ready right now, and the ability to have our programs ready and be looking ahead 5 years like this village does makes a big difference in getting that grant money. So thanks also to the staff for keeping heads up on that.
Thank you, Trustee. Other questions? Just a couple of questions back on the water. Is the water leakage, and you did say it, and we certainly acknowledge that you spend a lot of time on this, and it's very elusive. Is it a matter of resources in terms of what we allocate towards that, or is it technology that just doesn't exist where you can pinpoint? Is there something we as a board can do to resource your time and effort towards more efficiency on the water leakage? What would you say?
Right, and I think in order to make a recommendation for, resources, I think for me, I have to have a more comfort level knowing how to solve the problem, and I don't think we're there yet. And for example, while we have hypothesized that it could be a bunch of small leaks, again, that's just a theory. And so having prescriptive water main replacement throughout the village may not be the right solution and the right recommendation at this time. And so as we spend more time trying to figure out exactly what, is the leading cause for this, I think that at that time we would come back with a recommendation. There are some newer technologies out there that we're considering that you put these little systems out there and it's automatic leak locating. And so we're looking at those to see if those might be beneficial to us. And so there are new technologies, but I think overall we need to still continue to try to diagnose the problem.
Thank you. Maybe if it's something we can do in terms of agenda management, but in July, let's come back and just check with each other how it's going. It's not a full-blown workshop, but it's in between now and the next time we convene as a group to talk about capital and water. We take a look, see if there's any evolution or product out there, anything you've heard. That way it keeps the board and myself tuned in to something we probably need to continue to address, and appreciate all your efforts on that. Other questions for Ryan? So we've got a roof on the fire department. We've got a HVAC on the police department, bus shelters, train station, some grants offsetting that. That looks like our year, and then we've got the various sewer and water funds, including the East Avenue pump station. I would just echo, we heard a lot of completed and finished and closed out and closing out with IDOT and things like that between the last time we gathered here and set these priorities. And that was also as we were studying and doing emergency, repairs and things like that. So appreciate your tremendous effort there. All right, please digest this list and what you've heard. I would open it up. Are there any questions from the public in terms of the capital side? If not tonight, just don't hesitate to email and communicate on that. Very good. Mr. Polipshin.
That concludes our report for this evening, Mr. President.
Very good. With that, we have no items before us under executive session. Are there trustee comments? Seeing none, seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 We are adjourned until February the 8th at 7:30, and thank you.